Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. At this stage in steps 17 and 18, now that the wing is done and the tail section is attached to the tail boom, they say that you should glue the tail boom onto the fuselage. I disagree with that strongly. What you want to do now, well, first you got to put in these little carbon fiber horns and glue them into place. I think that's a lot easier to do when you've just got a tail boom. Once you add the fuselage onto the nose of this becomes longer and harder to handle. So why not go ahead and glue those in now before gluing the fuselage to the tail boom. Also, they don't discuss at all how to run the thread, the line, the wire that goes from the horns through this boom and into the fuselage to the servos. Now, most DLG gliders use a spring and pull method. And what that does is there's a spring that will hold the surface in a particular position, let's say up, okay? And you have a piece of, it's, I'm not going to say thread. Some people use a very thin steel wire. Some people use this. This is Kevlar thread. And the reason you want to use something like these two items is that it doesn't stretch. It won't get longer in time. It is always going to be that same distance. So you can center out the servo by stretching that line to the servo, making the connection, and then the thread will hold against the spring. When the servo pulls, it will pull against the spring, moving the control surface down. When the servo goes in the opposite direction, it will release the tension on the string, and the spring will bring the surface back to center and beyond. So it's a very light method for controlling the tail surfaces, a lot lighter than solid push rods. The problem is have a look here. This is where our horn is going to be for our elevator. Do you see any way to get the thread into this fuselage? There was no hole drilled in here. Okay, now for the rudder, the thread can come straight out the back and attach here. But you do have this edge here as a potential wear point. But for this, there's no access point, and they don't talk about it at all in the directions. There's no mention of routing those lines, and I think it would be a lot easier to route them through the tail before it's mounted to the fuselage. Because once it's mounted to the fuselage, not only do you have to get it down the tail boom here, but you've got to get it through the fuselage and past the servos into the nose. It's got to come all the way through to here. So you'd have to be dangling that thread down here and not get it hooked on. Now, the best thing to do in that situation would be to use a very thin piece of music wire that's longer than the combined length of the tail surface and the fuselage. Tape the line or wire to the end of that piece of music wire, and then use that like fish tape. If you've ever run cable through walls, in a home or an office, you know what fish tape is. If you don't, it's basically just a rigid, long, yet flexible in some directions, a means of drawing cable through a wall structure. And so you would push that music wire through and drag it out the other end, and that would allow you to pull the line, because the line is going to, it's going to bunch up, it's going to hang up against the side, it's going to catch on things, and it's hard to get it to come down and out. And because we're working with such small holes, you can't like tie a weight to it and drop it down like a plumb bob or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole in the side, like an angled cut that like you would make for a normal push rod. And I'm probably going to use some thin plastic tubing and glue a small tube in here, just, about an inch of it, so that there is something for that line to run through, that it's not going to be chafing against the edge of the carbon fiber and eventually cut it. And I might even put a small piece of tube, glue it to the wall right here so the line doesn't chafe against this edge. I'll have to see what that angle is like, whether it's going to be an issue. It may not be, and I might just be able to put a little bit of epoxy on the edge of this to round the surface a little bit and make it not sharp, and that might do just fine for that. But I'm very surprised that in the directions they don't give you any inputs. You're definitely not putting this plane together in an hour without knowing how to run that line. So I'll go into this in detail as I do it and show you the methodology I'm going to use. You may have other ideas. You may have built a DLG in the past and have better ideas as to how to run that line and how to set this up. Please feel free to comment and leave that input for everyone who watches this video to read. And if there's something drastically wrong that I'm doing, or you've got a phenomenally better solution, I'll gladly edit the video and put up some like a text crawl or something describing the different method proposed. Okay, so I'm working on the tail section as far as the spring and the control horns. I have the spring in place, and it's kind of interesting the way they've got this set up. The design that you would think would be on top of the wing actually goes on the bottom of the wing, or excuse me, not the wing, the horizontal stabilizer. So its sprung position is in the up elevator position, and you pull it, it pulls down to level it and make the aircraft go down. This is the control horn for the elevator, and as you can see, it's not a hole, it's a hook. That allows you to make a loop on the string, and if you in fact, I would probably do this after any time you're done flying. Disconnect that line, let the spring return to its, as far unsprung as it's able to go, because fully unsprung would be a full 90 degrees. The idea being that you don't want the spring to get weaker over time. Also, if you want to be able to take off the horizontal stabilizer for transport, you need to be able to disconnect the line, and the hook allows for that. Now, it is glued into this slot. Even though they cut two slots, they only cut away the covering on one, so that should give you an idea of which side it needs to be on, below versus above. And I also tried the spring in a couple of different configurations, and the only way it works well is with the design on the underside. Don't ask me. But as you can see, the horn is rather loose. This slot is a little large. for the thickness of the carbon fiber horn. So instead of using CA like they recommend, I could use gap filling CA, but I think even that is a little much for how much extra space there is. So I'm going to use 5-minute epoxy. Now, just to make sure I'm getting a good grip, that the glue gets a good grip on this, I have roughed up the edge on both sides where the glue is going to be contacting the horn and attaching to the wood to try to make sure that there's a better bond. So I'm going to go ahead, mix up a little 5-minute CA and glue that in place. Okay, let me see if I can make this show up. I've cut a small notch in the tail boom, and I'm going to be using some of this material. It's a thin hose. This is the outer push rod. If you've ever heard of golden rods, RC golden rods, these are golden cable. It uses a thin metal cable for pull-pull setups. So it's just the right thickness to make a little pass-through for the Kevlar line. So basically that's just gonna, small piece of it's gonna slide in there, and that will allow the line to run through there and through here. Just about an inch long piece of it. In fact, I'm already getting that set up. I've cut a piece of line longer than I need and threaded it through this piece of tubing, and I tied a loop at the end and used CA glue, just a drop of thin CA on the knot, and so that is a permanent fixture now. And so I will be using a thin piece of music wire. I'm gonna feed this through the hole and out the other end of the tail boom, like so. And then I'm going to attach the other end of this line, draw it through, and then I'll slide this, once the line is pulled through to here, I'll slide this in place. I'll use a little bit of epoxy to glue it in place, and that'll be all set. Now I'll probably, you know, flex it a bit, kind of bend it into a bit of an S shape to help guide that line smoothly. So when that's in place, won't have to worry about the line wearing on the carbon fiber. Carbon fiber, especially when it's a rough cut, is extremely sharp, and it could rip through this line in virtually no time. Having that line moving back and forth through that hole would definitely be a problem. Now I have my control horn epoxied in place, as I told you, and so with that loop, when this is in place, the loop will just go over the end there, and then anytime I want to take off the stabilizer, I can back off the servo, pull the loop off, and let the stabilizer unspring, and then take out the 2 screws and remove it. Okay, so I've threaded the line through, I've put in the little piece of tubing, and I've got it taped in place. Now I can apply the 5-minute epoxy to this area, and that should be good to go. Now, if you don't have any of this golden cable housing, you could probably use the little red plastic tubes that come on automotive spray cans, like for brake cleaner and things like that. That would probably be good enough as far as the diameter. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that would be a good solution other than those 2 items. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel. If you click the bell icon, you'll receive notifications every time I launch a new video. Thank you for watching.